Welcome everyone to this special recorded interview for Dare Academy. It's myself, Barry McDonagh, Michelle Cavanaugh, Aida Beco here with you today. And on this call or this recording, we are going to talk about our personal experience with anxiety. So it's going to be more personal about our journey through anxiety and how we struggled with it and maybe what insights we gained through that struggle. So to kick things off, Michelle Cavanaugh, who's here with us, is going to tell us about her journey with anxiety. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Barry. Hi, Aida.
So do you want to start at the beginning, Michelle, how anxiety first manifested in your life?
Yeah, it was kind of boring. It started in sort of I don't have a great backstory to it, which is kind of nice. It's kind of why I like to share it because I don't have a history of trauma. I don't have a history of things that happened in my childhood. This started off with a one-off panic attack that just sort of snowballed into just something bigger. So I was 17 years old, I think, and we went out with a bunch of my friends. We got a bunch of Chinese food. We had a lot to eat. We had a lot of soda. We all piled in somebody's car and we went to the movies. And so it was winter in New York because I remember we all had these thick, heavy coats on. And I go into the row to watch the movie and I was up against the wall and my friend sat next to me. The movie theater was packed. And when it's cold outside and it's really hot and stuffy inside. So I started to, I guess, get that claustrophobic sort of feeling. And I remember feeling kind of nauseous, thinking, like hard to breathe in here. I felt very constricted, so I took off my coat and then I got hot and then I got lightheaded and then I started to feel like now I would call it DPDR, but I was kind of felt like my head was being sucked back into the air in the movie theater. And I just remember thinking, I need to get out of here. I thought I was going to get sick. I didn't know what to compare it to being a teenager. I just thought I was going to throw up or get sick. And so I got up and I ran out of the movie theater. And I remember standing in the freezing cold, like shivering. I was hot, but I was cold and I was retching and dry heaving. And I just remember thinking, like, something's wrong with me. I need to just get home. But I couldn't because my friends drove me there and I was stuck there. So I was like, okay, let's try and get back into the movie theater. And I remember kind of calming down, trying to calm down. And I remember opening the door to go back into the movies. And it was like I walked into a wall. As soon as I don't know, smelled the air or felt what that room felt like, whoosh, it was like another whoosh right over my head. And in my mind, I was like, is there some weird chemical in this air? Is there something weird in here that's like affecting my body that I can only sense? I don't know. I didn't know what was happening. I think I managed to, I don't remember clearly. I think I was in and out of the movies at that point. The rest of the time, I waited outside. And I just remember thinking, I want to get home. But I was also concerned that, oh no, I'm going to be stuck in the back seat of my friend's car with all of my friends, same way I was stuck in the movie theater. And sure enough, I was kind of okay until I'm crowded, shoved in the car with all of my friends. And now I'm freaking out in the car. And I had to go by the window and open the window because I thought maybe I was going to get sick and throw up. Whatever went on that day, it's like it sealed all of those things like glue. And so from that point on, I use this term Pandora's box. It was like Pandora's box opened up. I never cared about any of this stuff until suddenly that day I did. And then I just never stopped caring about it. It was like something sealed with those situations. And I was okay when I got home. I assumed I was sick. But then I remember thinking, going back to school on Monday, oh my God, what if this happens in school? It's fine if it happens at home, but what if this happens in school? What if I'm stuck in the classroom? I can't just leave in the middle of a test. And then it kind of morphed into stuck everywhere, trapped everywhere. I had to be the driver, not the passenger, because I had to be able to leave and get home. I had to sit on the aisle seat or by the window if I can't get the aisle seat so I could leave. Couldn't get dropped off places. Couldn't go to places like I had a very hard time staying in the classroom, staying in church. And it was all about my stomach. And that's kind of how it manifested, feeling trapped and thinking, I think I'm going to get sick. So it went on for years, quite a few years. I did not see a therapist. I did not take medication. Not that I recommend doing or not doing those things. I was just a stubborn 17-year-old, and I was like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Leave me alone. It's kind of like, it's your problem. It's not my problem. And if you were to ask any of my friends, they probably wouldn't have even known. Like, to me, it was a very like internal sort of thing. They wouldn't have even known at all. I kept doing all the things I did, but I would always find little ways out. I'd drive myself, I'd meet them. So it wasn't like you could see that it was affecting my life, but it was a very internal sort of thing.
No, Michelle, that really reminds me of my first panic attack. You've actually brought back so many memories that I'd kind of forgotten about. And I often say my whole anxiety issue started with a panic attack, which happened after heavy night of drinking. It was final school exams kind of thing. Here in Ireland, with this thing called the Leaving Cert. And when you finish the exams, everyone goes out drinking. And I was in church the next day and had a very similar experience. But before I talk about that first panic attack, I actually think it began before that. I've always said, no, it began with that first panic attack. But when I think back to my childhood, I was definitely a bit of an anxious kid around the ages of 8, 9, 10, maybe even 11, where like I vividly remember not wanting to have sleepovers, but I couldn't define why I didn't want to have a sleepover, but I just didn't want to. And I had to make all these excuses up, and it was awkward and embarrassing. And friends were kind of like, do you not like me? You know, do you not want to sleep over? And then there was a school trip I backed out of. And I remember telling my mom and getting her to come up with some excuse not to go, like a weekend away kind of trip, one of these rugby trips. And then and a little bit of OCD I can see now, where I remember being really small, it could have been 7 or 8, and I was throwing stones at a fence. And if the stone hit the fence, the metal bar in the fence, it meant the day was going to go okay. And if I missed, something bad was going to happen. And bad could be anything. Bad could be ill health, something happened to a family member, whatever. But I was definitely using it as a control, and then getting upset every time I missed. And, you know, stuff like that was definitely early kind of signs that not necessarily anxiety, but that I had sensitivity towards nervous arousal. You know, that kind of, I was a sensitive kid, definitely. And then 12, 13, 14, I was like really out in the world. It seemed like it all disappeared, and I was socializing and doing all those things. No anxiety at all up until the first panic attack at age 18 in the church. So had been out drinking the night before, and then I was sitting in the church pew, and there's, you know, you're a couple of rows in. It was probably coming towards the end of the mass, and I had that hot flush sensation. And for me, it's always about breathing. I just thought I couldn't catch my breath, and I was doing this and getting tighter and tighter, and now my heart is pounding because I'm going to suffocate, and I'd never experienced anything like this before. There's no one to talk to. I was there on my own, went outside, saw people walk past, but I didn't even know what to say to them, or I knew they wouldn't know how to respond. And I kind of, you know, deep down knew that whatever way they would respond probably wouldn't help, because they might start calling an ambulance, and that just would escalate things, whereas I was trying to de-escalate the situation. And the idea of trying to convince a stranger, you know, to help me was just all a bit overwhelming. So paced around, got my bike, unlocked it, and walked home. Couldn't cycle, walked it home, and got home. And then it's a bit of a blur after that, the next couple of weeks and months, but it was that spiraling into anxiety. So the fear of fear was there the whole time. I didn't tell my parents. I should have. I didn't tell brothers, sisters, friends, nobody. I was just kind of in my room trying to figure this thing out. And like I kind of remember coming down to watch TV, and then sitting there watching The Simpsons, and feeling so detached from myself, and all I'm thinking about is the next, what if that comes again, that feeling. I didn't have words for it. What if that feeling comes again, and how will I explain it to my parents, you know, what's happening to me? And then retreating to the bedroom, and then, you know, managing the day, just like you said there, Michelle, of, you know, controlling situations. So if I was getting a bus somewhere, or arranging to meet people, I'd go on my own on the bus, already planning what to say to the bus driver halfway through between stops, how I would get off the bus, how you explain that, and coming up with all these little excuses to get out of things the whole time, thinking ahead of what's my excuse if, rather than tell someone. So it was a lot of shame about this thing, this experience. And then it was I would say a year and a half of high general anxiety, and experienced all of those unusual sensations, the intrusive thoughts, the depersonalization. I mean, you name it, every kind of way anxiety could pop up, I had some experience of that. And the thing I feared the most was the intrusive thoughts and the depersonalization, because that's weird stuff. The physical stuff is kind of, I can kind of muddle my way through that, but the intrusive thoughts and the disassociation, or that disconnection from self, was just really, really horrible, because that was in the zone of you're going mad. In my mind, there's something really wrong here if you're feeling like that. And it kind of accumulated to that point where, and I described that in the Dare book, where I was in my bedroom, let's say we're about a year and a half into all of this, and I just said to the panic attack, come on, just kill me. I've really had enough of this. If I'm going to suffocate, and it was about the breath, let's suffocate now. And that was that pin moment where the balloon just popped, because I felt a shift going on. And it's almost a feeling of like, the resistance is a mental and emotional kind of rubbing, like sandpaper. It's a very, it's kind of a coarse feeling, when you're not moving in the right direction. And as soon as I did that movement of paradoxical intention, it felt a sense of freedom. And even my whole body loosened out, a sense of shedding something. And that was the beginning of my moving out of the anxiety disorder, so to say. And I could see how ending this inner civil war was going to be the way out. So I got an example of how it worked with the panic attack. And then I thought, this same approach could be applied to the intrusive thoughts and the depersonalization. Just that attitude of, bring it on, let's have more of this thing I'm so scared of. And that was always placing me back into a position of power and control. And I was making notes about that process as well. And that was the beginnings of that first book, Panic Away. And then, like I've talked about in recovery, it's you go a week and I didn't have an intrusive thought or that sensation of depersonalization. And then it would be 2 weeks, and then I'd wake up and I'd just feel really off and disconnected. And I think, oh no, I didn't get out of this. Something's gone wrong again. And it's probably going to be like this my whole life. I'm going to have maybe good days and then bad days, and good days and bad days. And that was that first setback where I just kind of lost my confidence. And that could have spiraled me back for weeks into that, should I be really seeing a doctor about this? Should I be telling people? I still hadn't told people. I really still hadn't shared it out of shame and fear. But I came back to that same approach, that same philosophy of, let's not resist this. Let's try and move with it, stop the inner conflict. And gradually came out of the setback and felt that sense of freedom again. And I'm sure people listening to this know the different kind of phases that you can go through as well, where when your confidence is building, you start to do things that you've been putting off. So overseas travel, came back again, and just even overnight trips and things that I just really had been putting off started to become part of my life again. And went months and months, no setbacks. And then that's the recovery process. And then got to a point where it just never intruded in my life again in that same way. And of course, there were times in the years after that where I might have had, again, being out, there was a relationship with alcohol, might have had a bad hangover and could have been on an airplane or a train. And hot environments, stuffy environments would again make you feel a bit claustrophobic. And I would feel all of that come back, that rush, the tightness of chest, everything. But now, because I had the tools, it didn't manifest in that exact same way. And I felt empowered again, and really empowered because I felt I had a toolkit here I could use anytime the anxiety manifested. So that kind of gives you a overview of my journey through anxiety. And people do ask me as well, do you suffer from anxiety now? And my answer is always the same. I deal with stress and anxiety the same way everyone does. When things in life are tough or difficult, it's normal to feel anxious. But the difference being is that I don't get caught up in that loop anymore, in that disorder, so to say. And I know whatever nervous arousal I might be feeling, I know it'll pass. And it was really, really empowering having that information. And if I had even just the Dare book back then, what was that, late 90s, if I had the Dare book back then, I know the whole episode probably would have lasted a week or two. I would have just got the book, gone, oh, so that's what that is. That's what that is. And here's tools, great. And I would have definitely not spiraled for that year and a half into that extreme state of high anxiety. So, Aida, would you like to share your story with us?
Yes, I'd love to. I think it's so cool we're sharing our stories with people out there, because sometimes you never know if the therapist can really relate to what you are saying. And I think it's immensely helpful to know that whatever you are experiencing is nothing new to them. And my experience was kind of similar to yours, Barry, just mine was a faster, happy ending, I would say, because I had you. So your experience was so helpful for me. But mine started also with a panic attack. And I think the first panic attack I had was about 12 or 13 years old, but it was this one-time thing. I never knew what it was, and it just never came back until I was, I think, about 17 years old. This is where I had another panic attack just out of the blue in the night. And that lingered around for, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 months or so. But then I was so busy with life and studying and socializing, and that went away too. Until in my early 20s, I had an MRI appointment. And I've had many of those before, and I was never claustrophobic and nothing had ever happened. But this day, out of the blue, all of a sudden, I had this major, major panic attack, and it just caught me off guard. And I was like, what the hell was that? And from that point, kind of like everything spiraled down, because as anxiety tends to generalize so fast. And this is what had happened to me. So I had this panic attack in the MRI, and all of a sudden I found myself not being able to drive through the car wash or step into an elevator or being alone at home. Yeah, and from there it moved to more of the mental sensations. All of a sudden this creepy feeling of, oh my God, something is really wrong. Because those first 2 weeks, I was kind of like just observing it and thought it's just going to settle down. It's going to be okay. It's maybe just something that randomly popped up and will settle down, but it didn't. And then I started to experience intrusive thoughts. And I had never experienced those before, or I was never aware of them, at least. And the first time I had an intrusive thought, like I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep or drink or do anything because I was so shocked by them. And then I started to have sleep issues, because obviously I was in such a heightened state, constantly trying to figure out what is going on. Of course, Googling the sensations, and you know how Googling goes with all the different sensations that you get. And that scared me more and more. And then I went to see a therapist, and it was not such a great experience, because it was more about trying to figure out all the trauma you went through in your childhood. And I told her, she asked me, well, what are you afraid of? And I said, well, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my mind and become psychotic. And she was like, yeah, that might be possible. And I was like, oh my God, that was horrible. And I never went back, because although I felt so out of control and so scared, deep down, I knew I wasn't crazy. I just didn't know what it was that I had. And I didn't know that this panic attacks or generalized anxiety. So that went on for on and off, I would say, for about 2 years. And that was in the early stages of my career as a therapist. And being a good therapist, of course, I wanted to find out the cause of this. So I went down that route until I figured out all my grandmother's traumas and what has happened in every day of my childhood that might have contributed to my anxiety, which obviously, if you have been down that road, you know how this ends. Like, it never stops. And the more you try to find out the cause for how you feel, the deeper you just sink into that. It seems like you are an insolvable problem. And then one day I felt so defeated, really, because I think I've went through like the 10th trauma online retreat, whatnot. And it didn't help. It actually made it worse, because obviously if you work through some things, it sensitizes your nervous system. And then one night I said, I can't do this anymore. I need to leave this to the universe and just let go. And so I remember clearly I was in the bathroom coloring my hair, and I was searching something on YouTube. And then you did an interview, Barry, with someone. I don't remember who that was. And I was like, who is this guy, Barry McDonagh, talking about anxiety? I was like, well, he has a book. Yeah, okay. I've spent so much money on this, so let me just try this too. And I downloaded the dear book. And as I was listening to it, it's like the first chapter, I think it's the introduction of the book, where you say, I know how it feels to wanting to escape your own mind and body. And that hit home. Oh, hold on a second. He's interesting. What is he saying? And so I listened to the book, I think in 2 days. And I felt like, oh, this is the missing puzzle piece. This is really what is going on. I don't need to look any further. I just need to change my relationship with anxiety. And I did. I started practicing the first days, tried out different things, added some techniques, and it worked beautifully. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that, Aida.
Yeah.
I love the detail on these stories. I think it's great to just hear specifics, because people, I think, relate to those kind of specific stories, even the locations that these things happen, the cinema, Michelle, people can really relate to that environment. And Aida, in your case as well, sometimes just the moment when anxiety attacks and you think, I'm so alone with this, and where do I turn to for help? Like, what's the next place I go to for help? I think is a big thing that comes up for people a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I would like to hear, Michelle, so how did you find a way out of your anxiety?
I sort of stumbled through it, because it was the same kind of time period as Barry, the 90s. So there was no books. I mean, there were books, but you went to the library, and I had to know what to look up. And again, it was secret for me too. It was like, I'm fine, nothing's wrong with me. And everything was like, again, less shame and more about embarrassment. So again, I kept showing up and doing things, and I was just trying to figure it out on my own. So it got to the point where even like I was barely eating food, because you're not going to throw up if you don't eat anything, right? I didn't want to not eat food, but that was the biggest. Like the way I describe it, it didn't feel scary. It felt like danger. And that's what happens when anxiety, that fear, sort of imprints on a certain thing. That thing doesn't feel scary anymore. Like you guys probably had the same thoughts, but suddenly it feels like danger instead of just scared. And I never really know how, that's the only way I know how to explain that to somebody who's never experienced this before. I just felt like nausea suddenly was dangerous. And I never cared about that before. I was sick before. I threw up before. I was stuck in places before. But it was like I was desperately trying to stop caring, until finally I kind of got that, I'm not going to say the words, but whatever mindset. And I had to start slow. So for example, let's say it was church. Normally my parents would drive my sister and I to church, and I would be in the back seat of the car and she would be in the back seat, and we would drive together, and we'd sit there for an hour wherever they would put us, and then they drive us home. I could not do that. No freaking way. I would just stay home. It was too much for me to do. And so I had to start small. I said, you know what? I'm going to go to this mass at this time, and I'm just going to stand in the doorway, and I'm going to stand in the doorway for 5 minutes. And if I barf, I barf. I'll just barf in the bush out here in church, and God will forgive me. Like I went with that, I'm going to do this on my own sort of mindset. And I kind of chunked it a little bit, where I just started showing up, and like, I did not know what I was doing. I did not follow any sort of special approach. I didn't read any books. I just sort of did a lot of that, where it's, yeah, I'm going out, I'm doing it slowly, and however I feel is how I feel. And then I sort of grew that. I remember, because if anybody hears me on some of the recordings I do too, we talk a lot about your story. And I remember, even like, let's say it was church again, like my story of, I feel so smothered, I can't breathe in here, all these little old ladies smell like roses and powder, and I think I'm gonna throw up. I had to like switch it to like, or I feel like I'm being like hugged by a cloud, and maybe it's comfortable, and maybe I feel just, maybe this is like, I feel warm and protected and taken care of. And I remember just thinking about this, like, I wasn't purposely doing it, but I kind of took note of, like, when I kind of started thinking about the same situation in a different way, it felt different. So I mean, those are just the sort of things I would do. I was so stuck in the morning. Every morning I would wake up, and I'd have like 2 seconds of bliss. Like, you forget what your life is for a little tiny period of time. I wake up and I go, ah, am I nauseous? Right? How's my stomach? And you go looking for whatever it is you don't want to find. And I found it every morning. And I would go really slow in the morning. I'd lay on my side, and I would have a million things. I'd have peppermints, and I'd have antacid Tums, and I'd have a glass of water, and then a seltzer in case the water felt too heavy, and always a hair tie to pull my hair back if it was too hot, and if I threw up. I always planning for disaster. And so every morning I would get up, and I would be so nauseous, and I would, in my head, I'd go, don't get sick, don't get sick, don't throw up, don't throw up. And I would be in such a tense state, I would start retching and dry heaving again. And it would just sort of reinforce how awful mornings were. So it was almost like I woke up looking for the problem every morning and found it, until, again, I just sort of had this shift in my mindset one day of like, all right, time to get the heaves. I guess this is just what we do every morning. So whatever, I'm going to get up, and I'm going to, I guess, pretend, like, think I'm going to throw up, and almost throw up. Spoiler alert, never threw up that whole period of time. Threw up before, threw up after, but like, and it just shows, like, it's never about the thing happening or not happening. It's this constant state that I was in, desperately trying to make something not happen, until I sort of like resigned myself to the idea of, well, I guess this is just how my mornings are going to be. So let's just get up and let's just get this over with. And it was weird. Once I kind of started doing that, one day I'm like, oh, that's weird. I didn't do that gaggy thing. And then I did it. But then the next morning, and so like it kind of started fading away. And that's why I always say, like, progress is kind of always happens as a look back. Like when I was directly trying to do something to not have a feeling, I always had that feeling. But when I sort of went out, I noticed, oh, I kind of didn't realize, that's right, I was just in the car with my friends. Or I woke up this morning and I actually felt fine. Or I sat down to eat. Like, eating was always like all eyes on me too. That's how I felt, where like trying to swallow the food the right way, or don't embarrass myself because everybody's going to see me. And then what if I get sick? And until like it became easier, but when it was no longer a goal, it was sort of something that happened.
I can really relate to the information piece you're talking about there as well, Michelle, in terms of the lack of information that was available in the 90s. So it was 94 was when I had my panic attack. No internet, no mobile phones, obviously. And in that world, you're the only place you can go to is either a doctor, the phone book, or maybe a library. And I held off going to the doctor because I was afraid I'd just be put on medication. And I had this sense as well that the medical establishment were going to label this in a way that wasn't going to suit me, because I was going to be very fearful of that label. So I kind of had a hunch that was what was going to happen, and it probably would have had. So I did go to the library, and the books that I found there were just psychological books with a lot of very heavy jargon, a lot of clinical speak in it, which really made me feel worse, because I was looking for reassurance. And really what you get in a lot of those textbooks is just cold, hard facts and labels, and a lot of talk around management of this problem and no real solution. I think I did find one or two books that talked about deep breathing and distraction, and this technique of count 5 things, label 5 things in your environment to again help you distract you out of the anxious state. And I knew that wasn't going to work, because I knew when I was in a panic attack and thinking I was going to suffocate, there's no way I could look around and smell 5 things or touch 5 things or label things at all. Well, I knew that wouldn't work. So I felt quite helpless in that way. And it was this intuitive process of working my way through this problem, dropping the resistance, moving into that state of flow that I could see was working well for me. And I was writing about that. And it wasn't until the first book, Panic Away, came out that people started saying to me, oh, you must read Dr. Claire Weekes, Hope and Help for Your Nerves. And I'd never heard of her before, but when I went to get the book in the library and read it, it was so aligned with this same philosophy. I was like, wow, so somebody was writing about this, and she wrote it back in the 50s. And, was then probably the most popular book for overcoming anxiety. But there was no Amazon to go on to. There was no reviews you could read. This was kind of word of mouth. Word of mouth was how her book was spreading around. And maybe good therapists and good doctors were recommending it. But we were all at a disadvantage by not having the internet at that time. And the other person who kept popping up was Dr. Viktor Frankl, and his therapy called logotherapy, which is in one of his books, but it's only very briefly described, where he talks about panic attacks. And he says, well, for panic attacks, I recommend people bring it on. I recommend they make it worse. And it's called paradoxical attention. I was like, oh, wow, there it is. So it was quite reassuring to see it. It was in print and people were writing about these things. It just wasn't reaching people. People were not really hearing about these books, certainly not in my circle anyway. And I remember the librarian had to order those books in. So it wasn't like it was sitting there in the shelf. They had to be ordered in from elsewhere. So, and then, the Dare book itself is this collective piece of wisdom. I always say that, because Panic Away first came out, and then we started building these online communities, and people would say, can we have a bit more of this? Can you elaborate on that point more? And, explain that in other ways. And that's why I think Dare became such a great book for overcoming anxiety, because I was listening to these people's feedback and what they felt helped them the most. And I was kind of doubling down on that. And that gets us where we are today now with this wonderful program, Dare Academy, which Aida has put so much great effort into, and which is such a great, comprehensive, deep dive into the whole philosophy of Dare. And everyone listening to this now, I believe, is truly lucky to be here listening to this, because, and Michelle, I bet you agree with this, is if this had existed back then, it would just have made our lives so much easier in terms of stepping out of that fear pattern.
Yeah, but what's interesting, Barry? Although my anxiety started 15, 20 years later than yours and Michelle's, it took so long, even in today's time, for somebody to tell me there's nothing wrong with you. And that was the hardest part. And this is what has helped me the most, really tap into my resources and my resilience and make progress. And the biggest hurdle on this, my journey, was believing that there is something wrong, that there is something that is broken inside of me that can't be repaired. And I've heard it so many times. Well, once you have an anxiety disorder, now you have that forever, and you just need to learn to manage it and to kind of modulate your life around it, so your life suits the anxiety disorder. And that is so discouraging, really. And it feels like it takes away the joy of your life. And even in many, I'm not saying in all, but in many modern therapies, this is the message that you get. And that is so wrong. And this is what has helped me so much move through this very, very uncomfortable experience of depersonalization, detachment, intrusive thoughts, panic attacks, fear of being alone, claustrophobia, all of the things that come with anxiety, which are really, really intense. So it's easy to feel like something is very, very wrong with you. And having somebody at the very beginning of the program tell you, you are all right, you have a behavioral problem, I think that's really the key that opens the door to recovery.
And it's why we're doing these interviews, to hear the stories and to normalize the whole thing. And most importantly as well, to give that very strong message that there is a full recovery from anxiety. And as people will learn as they're going through this program, they'll learn the right tools to use and implement that will give them that full recovery from anxiety. Because we're not here to manage the problem. It's to get your life back.
Yes, yes. And what I have a question that ties beautifully into this, Barry, and I think you get this question a lot, and I'm sure Michelle does, and I do too. So now, years later, years into your recovery, do you still get anxiety? And I mean anxiety about anxiety, not a normal anxiety that has a basis in real life, but the anxiety loop, the fear of sensation and the fear of the way you feel.
Yes, I still experience the feeling of anxiety, just like I experience the feeling of sad and of anger. Like, human beings have the capacity to feel anxiety. Remember, it's sort of like consider it like a rush of adrenaline with no place to go, or a misfire, something that your body did at like the wrong time. So of course, anybody has the capacity to do that. The amount of time I spend accommodating those feelings and trying to make sure those feelings, that's what I view as the disordered part of my life for this. And the non-disordered piece was I have a different relationship with the feeling of anxiety when it shows up. And so I know that's what I think, that if people use the word recovery, I would love for people to see it used in that way of like, when plain old bodies do things that I find uncomfortable, I no longer have to live my life around them. And that's why it's this freedom it's this freedom to be able to feel anxiety rather than I need to eliminate anxiety to eliminate an anxiety disorder. That's actually what basically starts everybody's disorders to begin with. Here's a feeling and I need to get rid of it. And so, yes, I experience anxiety from time to time and I get angry from time to time, but I don't judge it. I don't make a whole lot of decisions about it anymore. Maybe once in a blue moon, I do, right? Just like if you're tired, you don't go to the gym one day, but it doesn't dictate your life anymore. Maybe I'll still sit in this seat instead of this seat every once in a blue moon, but no longer am I making all of my day's decisions based on anxiety. And so to me, that's your freedom out of this, when the feeling of anxiety shows up and it really doesn't matter. So am I free of anxiety? No. Am I free from anxiety? Yes, because you don't have to get rid of something to be free from it. And so that's kind of how I view that.
And in my case, it's day and night. That person who was caught in that anxiety disorder feels such a distance from the person I am today. It was such a dark time for me. It was such a scary time for me. And when I transitioned out of that, when I look back on it, it feels like almost hard to relate to being so scared of my own mind, so scared of my own body. And I think what I'd really like people to understand is that today I experience stress and anxiety like everybody else does. So a bit like the same way Michelle was describing there. Life throws things at you, and you adapt and you do what you can, but I do not get caught up in the fear of fear anymore. I do not get caught up in the anxiety disorder. So anxiety never stops me from doing anything. I would never second guess the day thinking, well, what if something happened in that situation? How would I respond, or how would I handle it? So I live life, I suppose, like anybody else who has never dealt with anxiety disorders, in that I don't fear fear. And on the odd occasion where I'm really tired, there's stuff going on and I get all that sensitization back, I feel that discomfort, I know exactly what it is, and I can just easily transition out of it or sit with it and allow it to be as is, without scaring myself over it. And I think that's the real difference between the person I was then and the person I am now.
And for me, no, I don't get anxiety about anxiety. And I like to call it this way because, as Michelle and Barry just said, anxiety is a normal human emotion. We all experience that from time to time. But the anxiety we're addressing in this course is not that kind of anxiety we're talking about. Anxiety about maybe losing my job, or anxiety about, I don't know, whatever life throws at you. But we're specifically talking about fearing your own body, fearing your mind, and getting lost in worry and obsession about outcomes and over controlling things. And this I do not get anymore. I don't fear my body. I don't fear from time to time I will have racing thoughts in stressful times, but I don't get afraid of that. I don't even think about, oh my God, what might this mean now? And I think that's really the part. We have a normal emotion, and we have the disordered response to those emotions and sensations. And this is really where the anxiety lives and where we feel so out of control. As you just said, Barry, it's such a different person who went through that very intense phase, who felt so lonely and broken, and at such a young age, right? When I transitioned out of it, what really struck me was how much of an illusion I was living. Like 99% of the things that I was so afraid of, just in my head, it was just an illusion. There was no basis in reality for them. And the realization of that, it has the power to instantly change the perception of your whole life. The joy returns back, your sense of self-worth and freedom and self-esteem and being capable and a competent person instantly returns when you open the doors from that imaginative prison that you've been living in.
Yeah, and I think the key word here is freedom. And I'm really excited for the people who are watching this right now and who are starting to dive into this program, because really within this course is the key is there to unlock this problem, this fear of fear, and to enable you to step out into a much, much greater sense of freedom and empowerment for yourself. So I'm personally really excited for the people who are watching this, because there is such an opportunity to find freedom from your anxiety issue here. And as we were saying earlier, you know, if I personally had these tools or this information back then, I know I would have transitioned out of that problem so fast. And I hope people who are watching this are inspired to really give this their time and attention, because if you suffer from anxiety, I believe it's the most important thing to resolve in your life, because everything else improves when you resolve the anxiety issue. So we came here today to share our stories, our personal stories, because we wanted to inspire you and share with you this journey we've been on to give you hope that you too can have a full recovery from anxiety. And the next step is the exciting bit, where it's up to you to apply these tools, you know, learn the information and seek out your own freedom.
Yes, absolutely. And know that you are not alone. If the three of us would have known each other at the time where we had anxiety, things would have turned out differently. But everything happens for a reason, and here we are, being able to share all of this with you, and so that you can benefit from our experience. It's really wonderful. So I hope you get the most out of this course that you can. And whenever you feel stuck, or you feel like this is not working for me, it might have worked for Michelle and Aida and Barry, but for me it's different. Come back to this video and know that we've been there and we've been thinking the same thing. And all of the people who are going through it now are having these doubts. You are not alone. Reach out to us and to the DARE community. And I look forward to seeing you there soon.
And remember, so these are just our personal stories. So this is just happens to be how our anxiety manifested. So if you're thinking, oh, I can't relate because my thing is heart palpitations, and they didn't talk about heart palpitations, or I can only relate to Aida and Barry because they suffered, struggled with intrusive thoughts, but Michelle didn't. Remember, whatever it is that your fear has kind of imprinted to, especially when fear imprints on itself, right? Being scared of scared is the scariest thing to do. So this process really takes a lot of courage. This is not easy, but we hope with Dare Academy, we know it's not easy, but that we simplify all of this for you to show really how normal all of this is.
So thank you, those who are watching, for being here. Thank you, Michelle and Aida, for coming on and sharing your stories. We're so excited to see the results that you're going to achieve here with Dare Academy.